Mr. Matti Leisola is an emeritus professor or retired professor, and this information comes from his Finnish language Wikipedia article. There is no English language Wikipedia article, at least not in the main type of Wikipedia about him yet, which is a pity. He was born in the southern Finnish city of Lahti in November 1947, so at the moment he's 71 years old. He served as the professor of bioprocess technology at the former Helsinki University of Technology, which now is a part of the so-called Aalto or Wave University in the Helsinki region. He started his studies in the chemistry department of the Helsinki University of Technology and became a doctor of bioprocess technology in 1979. He completed his docent dissertation in 1988 on the biochemistry of lignins decomposition. He served as the research leader of culture from 1991 to 1997 and was responsible for the corporation's biotechnical research. In 1997, he returned to the Helsinki University of Technology to serve as professor of bioprocess technology. He also served as the dean of the Faculty of Chemistry and Material Sciences at that university until his retirement in 2011. He is a professing Christian, a lay member of the Finnish Evangelical Lutheran Church, although at least in the late 1970s he attended the Finnish Evangelical Free Church in Helsinki. He is a notable proponent in Finland, and he has also received international publicity because of his anti-evolutionist book, In the Wonderland of Evolutionary Faith. And he has also more than once lectured on that subject, and at least one or two of those lectures are available on YouTube. So I would urge this video's possible viewers to take a look at them, and especially those of you who are wondering whether a person can be a credible, seriously considered scientist and a born-again professing Bible-believing Christian. Professor Leisola has emphasized in his ministry the fact that we don't know for sure how young or how old the earth is. We don't know for sure how old or how young the universe is, but we should believe that only a supremely intelligent being, meaning God, can have designed the complex earth and the complex and diverse universe where we live. And therefore, the basic premises of evolution are wrong. In other words, life cannot have resulted from the so-called Big Bang. It cannot have resulted from blind, impersonal forces of nature, natural selection. It cannot have been caused by any accidents. And it cannot have been caused by the survival of the fittest. Sadly, one of the contributors to the evolutionnews.org website in February 2018 entitled this book review in the following notably nasty way, which is certainly unbecoming of someone who is a member of the scientific community. Because in the scientific community, at least ideally, there should be freedom to criticize, freedom to question, freedom to inquire. And one shouldn't think that those people who are religious, let alone those who are professing born-again Bible-believing Christians, should not be members of the scientific community at all. Even they have a right to be its members. Here in the Philippines and most of the rest of Asia, there is a greater respect for people's Christian or other religious beliefs, also if they are scientists. And there is a greater respect for the people who dare to question the evolutionary theory. Also in Africa, which never had the so-called Enlightenment, at least not in its Western European and North American forms. Also, I assume to some extent in Latin America, and then in the Oceania outside the profoundly secularized and westernized countries of Australia and New Zealand, probably there is a greater freedom to criticize the evolutionary theory than there seems to be in most of Europe, which still 50 to 100 years ago prided itself in many occasions, on many occasions, as being the bastion of the Christian faith, or in North America. Anyway, already the first sentence shows how nasty and anti-Christian and anti-biblical this writer's worldview was back then. But let us hope that by God's grace, he will come to repentance and he will become a born-again, Bible-believing and professing Christian, just like the retired professor Matti Leisola. So he writes, and I quote, Jonathan Witt writes, and I quote, Matti Leisola isn't supposed to exist. So in other words, is he saying that no born-again, Bible-believing, professing Christians should be members of the scientific community, and especially ones who dare to criticize the evolutionary theory? They have a right to do so. If the non-religious people or anti-religious or anti-Christian people have the freedom in the Western democracies to criticize and attack the Christian faith and the Bible, also the Bible-believing, born-again and professing Christians must have the freedom to criticize the evolutionary theory. According to the standard pattern from evolutionists, there is no controversy about evolution in the scientific community, nor any need for serious consideration of the theory of intelligent design. Wrong on both counts. There is. That's because no legitimate scientist doubts modern evolutionary theory. Really? How about Francis Collins, who is a proponent of the so-called theistic evolution? And surely is a competent scientist. Born in April 1950, in other words, some 2.5 years younger than the retired Professor Leisola. He's an American physician geneticist who discovered the genes associated with a number of diseases and led the Human Genome Project, and is currently serving as the director of the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, United States. He has also written a number of books on science, medicine, and religion, including the New York Times bestseller, The Language of God, A Scientist Presents Evidence for Belief. After leaving the directorship of NHGRI, or National Human Genome Research Institute, and before becoming director of the National Institutes of Health, he founded and served as the president of the BioLogos Foundation, which promotes discourse on the relationship between science and religion and advocates the belief that the perspective that belief in Christianity can be reconciled with acceptance of evolution and science, especially through the advancement of evolutionary creation or theistic evolution. In 2009, Pope Benedict XVI appointed Collins to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. So, sorry for this lengthy introduction or lengthy video, but in any case, I want to attack and criticize and question various statements made by this writer, although he probably is by the world standards a competent scientist. But he is by the Bible standards, unfortunately, a spiritually blind person. But let us pray for his salvation and the salvation of so many others in the scientific community who scoff at Christianity, including especially the atheist British biologist Richard Dawkins. And even if there may be a handful of such doubters in the US, there certainly are none to speak of in enlightened Western Europe, really. I think there are. He just is ignoring it, or maybe writing ironically, or ignoring them. A new book by and about distinguished Finnish bioengineer Matti Leisola authoritatively brushes aside these Darwinist talking points. The book is Heretic: One Scientist's Journey from Darwin to Design, co-written with Discovery Institute's Jonathan Witt, a senior fellow with the Center for Science and Culture. Okay, so not Jonathan Witt, but someone else had written this review, sorry. Dr. Leisola is the former Dean of Chemistry and Material Sciences at Helsinki University of Technology and the author of 140 peer-reviewed science publications on enzymes and rare sugars. So definitely not an experienced or an incompetent scientist, retired though he may be. Among other distinctions, he's a winner of the Latzis Prize of the ETH Zurich in Switzerland. While arguing from vast experience against modern evolutionary theory and for intelligent design, the book is also a memoir. The back cover nicely summarizes the narrative thread. What happens when an up-and-coming European bioscientist flips from Darwin disciple to Darwin defector? Sparks fly. Heretic is the story of Leisola's adventures, making waves, and many friends and enemies at major research labs and universities across Europe. Leisola's deep knowledge of biology is evident throughout the book, but fellow scientists may find chapter 10 particularly valuable. There, Leisola unpacks what he has learned about evolution and design from his work on engineering enzymes and microbes. Dr. Witt worked with Dr. Leisola to make the book readily accessible to a broad audience. So even those people who are neither scientifically educated nor scientifically experienced. So for the serious lay readers. A gifted science writer and explainer, Witt is the author of a previously published book, A Meaningful World: How the Arts and Sciences Reveal the Genius of Nature, Intelligent Design Uncensored, and 3 documentaries that have appeared on PBS, including The Privileged Planet. From the introduction describing how Leisola started down the path to scientific heresy, I would put the term scientific heresy in quotation marks. You can be a scientist and you can be a Bible-believing born-again and professing Christian at the same time. Fortunate. As a young student, I used to laugh at those who, as I thought, placed God in the gaps of our scientific knowledge. This God of the gaps criticism is often leveled against Christians and other religious believers, against all those who insist there is clear evidence of design in nature. To my way of thinking, such people lacked the patience and level-headedness that I possessed. It was so clear to me, instead of plugging away to discover that natural mechanism for this or that mystery about the natural world, these pro-design people threw up their hands and used the God did it explanation as a cover for ignorance. But eventually I came to realize that this criticism cuts both ways, since a functional atheist also can reach for pat explanations in the face of mystery. It's just that for him the pat explanation will never be God. That is, you do not need God in your explanatory toolkit in order to short-circuit careful scientific investigation and reasoning. I realized that I myself had been all too willing to stuff vague materialistic explanations into the gaps of our scientific knowledge. Also, their argument for entertaining only material explanations in the sciences just assumes that everything we find in nature has a purely material cause. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if there are features of the natural world, the laws and constants of nature itself, for instance, that really are the work of a creative intelligence? Scientists are supposed to investigate mysteries with an open mind, not assume an explanation from the outset. I came to see that the best approach is to evaluate which explanation among the live options is more logical and fits the facts better. One of the scientists who have already endorsed the book is Dr. Erik J. Van Damme, Emeritus Professor of Bioscience Engineering, so a colleague educationally of Dr. Leisola, Center for Biotechnology and Synthetic Biology, Ghent University, Belgium. Another is by zombie science author and biologist Jonathan Wells. Here we will only quote an especially colorful passage from German geneticist Mr. Wolf Eckehard Lönning's endorsement. Heretic, he writes, is the exciting story of almost the entire spectrum of aberrant motives, absurd fears, and unreasonable reactions to intelligent design, i.e., by evolutionary scientists, clergymen, and church institutions alike. Heretic is also a story of fellow Darwin doubters discovered and new supporters for ID1 in the most unexpected places. And it can be purchased at Amazon in paperback or Kindle. So I'll summarize Dr. Leisola's interview by Jonathan Sarfati for the creation.com, Creation Ministries international website. He explains, I like to call enzymes the tools of life, and this interview was made in 2009 or 10, maybe. They are a type of protein, a macromolecule, large molecule made out of specifically arranged amino acids. They are life's catalysts, that is, they greatly speed up scientific chemical reactions of living cells. Enzymes recognize, convert, transfer, transport, oxidize, reduce, join molecules together, and break them apart. The instructions to build them are encoded on our DNA. Dr. Leisola explains that just as the Finnish language has 29 letters, so the enzyme language has 20 biochemical letters, in quotation marks, amino acids, each of which is coded by three-letter words, in quotation marks, in the DNA language, which has 4 different letters. This combination, explains Dr. Leisola, is so specific that it helps anybody to find me out of all the people in the world, since no one else I know of has the same combination. An average enzyme contains about 300 biochemical letters. This makes each enzyme very specialized for a given task. So, for example, Dr. Leisola's group studied an enzyme called xylanase, which breaks down one of the most abundant carbohydrate polymers on Earth called xylan, found in plant cell walls. This fiber makes up about 30% of the birch tree. We interviewed Dr. Leisola because he is known as a skeptic of molecules to man evolution, which he calls storytelling. But he was not always skeptical, as he explains. I believed the standard story, meaning evolutionism, till I was about 22 years old, so sometime around 1969, 1970. He was born in November 1947. I used it, as I then thought, as a powerful weapon to argue against the Christian God, much like, for example, the British atheist biologist Richard Dawkins is doing now. Without realizing it, I was a typical product of the Western naturalistic educational system, and I certainly wanted to remain autonomous, that is, self-governing, and actually hated the idea of God interfering with my life. But he changed thanks to his girlfriend Maria, now his wife. She became a Christian, and I was suddenly faced with the reality of her changed life and new values. This led me to study the evidence for Christianity. The search led me to Christ. I then wanted to understand how good a weapon Darwinism was against Christianity. And it did not take much effort to realize that it stood on a shaky foundation. I first realized it when studying biochemistry and the weak efforts to explain the origin of life based on some rudimentary experiments. So it all started with a change in my belief system. Everyone has a belief system, and people use their belief system to interpret the facts. It's not really about the facts. His own field of enzyme research strongly argues against evolution and for a designer. He argues that, contrary to common belief, there is no reasonable naturalistic explanation for the origin of such information-rich functional molecules or to change one type into another. It is very difficult to obtain the letter sequence Matti, Leisola, his name, through a random process. It is far more difficult to obtain the biochemical sentence that specifies xylanese. When Matti first questioned evolution, he was just beginning his scientific career. He would ask his professors how evolution could create biological novelties. They, of course, had stories, but when it came to mechanisms, which science is all about, of evolution, they had no real explanations. Later, I started to present evidence for the limits of random change in scientific conferences of my own field. Until now, nobody has disagreed. With over 100 published and widely cited scientific papers, Dr. Leisola would be amused at the frequent claim no real scientist denies evolution. But they redefine science as naturalism, and as Matti points out, a real scientist is searching for truth about nature and not naturalistic explanations. Dr. Leisola says, Christianity is the foundation of modern science and explains why we can do science. A rational God created a rational man, or human being, in his own image so that he is able to understand the creation with his mind. Indeed, the creator, Jesus Christ, is called the Logos, meaning word, word of God, in John chapter 1, verses 1 to 3, and makes sense of this orderly universe and complexity of life. Those believing in a naturalistic explanation for the origin of life are the ones with a blind faith. Dr. Leisola, one of the big questions all humans face is, where did we come from? The Apostle Paul writes in Romans chapter 1 that God's invisible attributes are so clearly seen in his works that no one has any excuse to deny that he exists. So creation is fundamental to understanding our position and role in the universe. He agrees with agnostic evolutionary philosopher Michael Ruse that if evolution were true, then ethics is just an illusion, of course, because there are evolutionists who say that, for example, our existence, our life here on the earth is basically an accident, that there is no specific reason for that. And of course, if we consistently apply that theology, then there is no lasting reason to think that there are absolutely wrong actions, such as killing another person deliberately, not out of self-defense or not in warfare, for example, or not because he or she has been legally sentenced to die by execution. And then absolutely right actions. So no absolute wrong, no absolute right leads us then into the situation ethics, where ultimately we lose our sense of what is really right, what is really wrong, what is really true, what is really false. That is what postmodernism is much about. And it's interesting that even such self-professed atheist historians and philosophers such as Dr. Jürgen Habermas, I'm not sure if he's still alive, a German historian and philosopher, said in the early years of this century that we still draw from the Judeo-Christian heritage and that everything else is idle postmodern chatter. Can you imagine a self-professed atheist recognizing the value of Judeo-Christian heritage? Something that professor, or whatever his title is, Mr. Dawkins, does not seem to have the courage and humility to assert, or the honesty to assert. Without absolutes, there cannot be any ethical standards. This is clearly seen in the development of our Western culture. When Christian consensus is gone, the society is helpless in trying to impose rules on people. More and more people do what they want, and fewer people are asking what is right and what is wrong. So, quoting Apostle Paul, Dr. Leisola says, "I am not ashamed of the gospel." And then he goes on. It gives answers to the big questions that no other system gives. What is the origin of universe and life? What is the basis of the uniqueness of man and morals? And what gives a solid basis for equal worth of all people and the value of an individual? Modern man is confused because he has no, and of course we can say modern people are confused because they have no rational answers to these questions. And finally, the interviewer asked Dr. Leisola how he would advise a young Christian wanting to study science. The best advice comes from the Bible. Prepare yourself to be always ready to give reasons for your beliefs. 1 Peter 3:15. Be not ashamed of the gospel because it has the answers people are looking for. Romans 1:16. And be wise as serpents, meaning snakes, and harmless as doves. Matthew 10:16. Do not get worried when the world hates you. It is a good signal as long as it happens because of Jesus. John chapter 15, verses 18 to 20. Have a blessed and comforting Easter, all of you.